Welcome to Catholic in America. Today we are talking about the bad place.
We're going to be discussing what is hell and what do people think about it.
And is anyone there?
Stay tuned. Welcome to Catholic in America. Today we are talking about the bad place, hell, and I'm Father Michael. I'm joined by Father Doug and Father Tom, two experts on hell. So good to see you guys.
Good to see you
too.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about hell, the bad place, we can talk a little bit about that show, The Good Place. I don't think we have the rights to use that name or use any likeness, but
we're not talking about Florida in the summertime, right?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
The bad place as in hell, burning for all eternity.
Got it.
What do people think about hell? What do people that you encounter in your daily life, what are their thoughts about it? Who goes there? What's kind of the consensus of a modern 21st century American when we talk about hell?
If someone believes in hell, and I think that's the first thing to say is that there's people who don't believe in it, who doesn't think, if they believe in God, they don't think that a good God would actually have a place like this or would send people to hell. And so if they even do believe in it, then it's really for the worst. It's for the people who do the worst things, commit the worst. I mean, it's the worst people you can think of. As a matter of fact, you hear of someone who does something really bad, and they say, "Oh, there's a special place in hell for them."
Right.
Yeah.
So Hitler, someone who Stalin hurts kids, someone who talks in movie theaters, the worst possible things.
Yeah.
Or the opposite extreme is people who think that everyone who disagrees with me is going to hell.
Yeah.
So anyone who doesn't agree with my political agenda, everyone who doesn't agree with my political stance on social issues, these people are all going to burn in hell while I watch them burn from eternity in heaven.
So there's different descriptions of hell, or I think of the show The Good Place, that this revelation that,
being with Ted Danza?
Certain being with Ted Danson for all eternity becomes the bad place, becomes hell. And so this recognition of like hell is kind of maybe just a bunch of inconveniences or it's torture.
Yeah, that's the torture. Exactly. That it's not just a place you go where you're unhappy, but it's a place where you go where you're absolutely and completely tortured to the extent that you just can't stand it anymore, and you're in complete unhappiness.
This we're forgetting the name of the existentialist playwright who said that hell is other people as well.
Right.
I might have experienced that once or twice.
Some people see hell as isolation and loneliness.
Right.
Some people see it as just being with other people. And I wish to be left alone. But
answering emails.
Yeah, I think of the Twilight Zone episode. In a sense, it's kind of an existentialist sort of thing, where the guy, all he wants in life is to be left alone so he can read. That's all he wants in life. And finally, there's like a nuclear holocaust, and he gets locked in a library. And he's like, I could just spend the rest of my life reading. He steps on his glasses, so he can't read. He's got all these books around him. So in a sense, it's like this divine retributive kind of annoyance, that torture that gets at the very core of who I am. We also have the Divine Comedy. I don't know how many people read that anymore. Yeah. That's kind of the images, artistic images that we have of hell, which is fascinating. You read through that, and that's Dante's descriptions of hell. He had some vivid dreams or something to help him to be able to come up with those tortures and those ways of whatever sins people committed in life, that those are the things that are sometimes literally eating away at them for all eternity.
And retributive, because that's also the other notion of hell, is that the injustices that had happened. This is not unique to Christianity. This would be found in even the old understanding of Tartarus. If you look at the Greeks, I believe it's Prometheus, who's eternally tormented for giving fire to humanity, and therefore he has I think it's the eagle, which is eating his intestines throughout eternity for his transgressions of the evil that human beings have committed now with the power which has been entrusted to them. So this retributive as well as rebalancing.
It's not rehabilitating.
Retributive.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Well, and then you have that idea also from Rob Bell, this popular evangelical theologian who, well, not even theologian, pastor, who's now with Oprah, but he wrote a book called Love Wins. And of course, in this idea of love wins, hell is this place that's preparing you for heaven, actually. So you go there, but God's not going to leave you there, because ultimately his love wins.
That's interesting. That sounds like a similar concept that we have in Catholicism.
It
Called
does sound
purgatory.
It does sound very similar to that.
We're going to have another episode. This episode is on the bad place. We're going to have another episode on the shower before the wedding feast, which is purgatory. So, yes.
Another time. Yeah.
So I think a lot of people probably maybe can see that the fear of hell, like don't do that, you'll go to hell, sort of thing, as shame-based, as something that can can be damaging psychologically. And I think maybe some people experience that as like, I was always afraid I was going to go to hell as a kid. I don't know if that's something you guys grew up with as a fear of hell or someone put the fear of.
You're talking about Catholic guilt?
Yeah. It's not just Catholic. I never say Catholic guilt. We were Hare Krishnas, so we had Hare Krishna guilt was a whole other level.
Well, I remember for me going to these Hell's Fires, Heaven Flames that some of the Protestant churches did at Halloween. So rather than having a haunted house you went through, you got to go and see these people die in a car accident, and some of them go to hell and some of them go to heaven. Nothing any scarier than that. And then there was also this movie called It's Too Late. And so in It's Too Late, it was talking about if you didn't, live the right way and do the right things, you were going to wind up going to hell, and what that actually would be like, and missing out on all the blessings and all that stuff. So,
wow.
Oh yeah, scaring the dickens out of you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, where you wanted to live this way because you didn't want to go there, and showing just how terrible the place is, so you wouldn't want to go.
But I think also modern conversation, which kind of going on the same train of thought of that as that, is kind of like the psychological, like what is the psychological, and this would be like an atheist, the modern day atheist who points out the negative psychological effects of living in fear. And so like especially when you have a fear-based religion, that's one of the accusations that are oftentimes leveled against Christianity and Judaism, is this fear-based, like you're instilling fear in people from a young age, and by instilling fear in them, they're not acting out of freedom, they're just acting out of opposition to this fear-based, and therefore it has a detrimental psychological effect. So why are you teaching people about hell, especially when there's no evidence and there's no there might not be any eternal justice. There might be not any. When you die, you might die. So like, why cause people to live in fear for like their entire lives, fear of this horrible reality, which might not actually ever be?
Right. True. And so why do you think then that people, there's a desire that things will be made right?
Yeah.
That, wickedness will be punished. There's some sort of desire towards that. I think we can try to do that this side of death, as much as possible, but that there seems to be some sort of sense of that, of like, you mentioned that when someone does something horrible, there's a place in hell for special place in hell for someone like you, for that type of person. Yeah. And we can think of, the unspeakable crimes that humans commit against each other that kind of elicit those sort of responses. But what is it within us that is longing for that, or is hoping for that, some sort of retribution or punishment?
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny also that it's never me, it's always someone else that's going to, have this special place for them. But the idea of justice itself, that an act that's so heinous and so bad has to have eternal repercussions, because if it doesn't, there's just not enough we can do to someone here to help them experience the kind of pain or the kind of devastation that they cause or the kind of loss that they cause. And so, it's very understandable that you would want something to actually give the kind of justice that we're not able to give here. And we all have heard and can think of people that have gotten away with lots of things in their life. Lots of times, like, God forbid, in these mass shootings, when someone takes their own life right after they do it, the people are really upset about that because you weren't able to punish them in this life. And so the hope is that when this person comes at that, it's going to be even worse for him than it would have been if he'd have stayed here.
And the questions of this always keep coming up. Recently, Pope Francis is always coming up with topics and off-the-cuff remarks. And recently, a young boy who tragically lost his father was asking Pope Francis in like a public question and answer forum about his father, who was an atheist, whether he was going to go to heaven. And Pope Francis had a very pastoral response to that about God's desire for us to go to heaven. But it was interesting to me still that there's this worry, there's this concern as you get to the end of life, even if you haven't been a practicing Christian or someone there, of what happens next. I think that's always troubled us, something we always struggle with.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's present in almost every. It's not unique to Christianity or to Judaism.
We didn't invent it.
That's present in almost every world religion. I mean, if you look at Taoism, or you look at Shinto, or you look at a lot of the different world religions, especially like Hinduism, where you believe in reincarnation, where the reincarnation though is dependent upon your karma and your dharma. So the way in which that your actions reverberate into your next life, and therefore that's their whole system of like, if you are a bad person, if you do more harm than good, then that will affect your reincarnation level in that. So like when you look at like all these different world religions, almost all of them have to do with some type of justice, whether the justice be intentional and personal, like in the theist models, or whether it be an impersonal force which just rebalances and brings order back into the universe. But still, I mean, that's one of the fundamental key components of all world religions, is this notion of that our actions reverberate throughout eternity, or that at least they have some type of long-lasting consequence which happens after this life. So I think it's a fundamental question in the human consciousness that
there's a desire for justice.
There's a recognition of order, like that when there is disorder, when there is something which is unbalanced, like that there is an order, and so like there's this innate sense within the human person and consciousness that order, like disorder, demands a counterbalance. Which is, I mean, that's what retribution kind of is.
Going back to that show, The Good Place, not that I want to give spoilers for it or anything else, but basically it's an understanding of the afterlife really without God. And and it's not being ugly about it or anything else. It's a funny show, it's a humorous show, but kind of like what is our understanding of like what gets someone sent to hell. And a lot of times they are those sort of, I mentioned something tacky, talking in a movie theater or something like that. It is kind of
leaving the cap off the toothpaste.
Those sorts of annoying things that you do to other people that like, you're going to be punished for this, or that it is kind of impersonal, that it's like a tally sheet growing up over your life. How many good, benevolent things did you do? How many annoying, selfish things did you do? And is one of those greater than the other? And it's kind of like this divine, not even divine, just sort of, pragmatic tally sheet, balance sheet at the end of your life kind of tips you one way or the other.
Right, that's one thing that's funny about the show that you're talking about. One of the characters on there is actually a good moral person, tries to be a good moral person. The reason why he's in the bad place is because he tortured people with his indecisiveness. And so he wasn't actually a bad person necessarily, except that
Spoilers for The Good Place.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Excellent. So thinking about this, I think as a shift in society, and again, some modern surveys that have said that large percentages of believing Christians and Catholics that believe there's a hell, maybe, but that it's very few people that will ever get sent there. It's only really the horrific cases of, the Hitlers of the world that go there. So generally, people are good, and they're probably going to go to heaven. What do you think is behind that shift for people, as you see the shift of a tendency as a believer, as a Christian, to not really ask about what does the Bible say about this, what does our faith teach about this, but more that it seems like less people are being sent to hell,
these days,
right?
I think in the modern world, as you look at how people understand God today, especially with the very common understanding that God is love. And as God being loving, like God does not want anyone to go to hell, and God is not going to send anyone to hell. And so especially that God accepts people where they are. And so especially as we've had the promotion of, in our society, as a virtue of tolerance and acceptance, God accepts everyone where they are. It's hard for people to grapple with the idea, especially in the modern world, of how a loving God would allow this. And so therefore, you kind of have this movement towards, no, there's really, if there is anyone in hell, it's only the really bad people. Right. Other than that, God kind of works with each person as they are and tolerates people and just kind of moves them incrementally closer to Him.
Okay, so we're going to dive a little bit more into this, because I think this is worthy of looking at how our faith interfaces with this concept of the bad place. We're going to talk more about our faith and hell when we come back. Hey guys, thanks for checking out Catholic in America. I'm Father Michael Nixon, and I like to party.
And I am Father Tom Dillon, priest here in the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee. I think I have the longest hair in probably the state, and I too like to party. I like whiskey and cigars.
Father Doug Martin. I'm also a priest here in the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, and I'm married and roll tide.
Oh my goodness. Yes, sir. I was okay with the being married part, the roll tide thing. In Catholic in America, we engage the intersection between faith and culture.
Tune in every week because no topic is out of bounds.
We want to thank you so much for supporting this show by watching it, by liking, sharing, and subscribing. How else can they support the show?
You can also become a patron on Patreon and support us financially.
So if you support us, there's all kinds of swag. There's T-shirts, there's coffee mugs, or maybe bumper stickers. I don't know. Maybe we could come up with a wig from Father Tom.
Father Tom wig would go a long way. So thanks for your support. God bless y'all, and check us out next time on Catholic in America. Hey guys, welcome back to Catholic in America. Today we are talking about the bad place.
And if you don't want to end up in the bad place, you'll like, share, and subscribe.
And as always, we thank you for your support. And if you'd like to continue your support or support us for the first time, please look us up on Patreon.
So let's start with Scripture, okay, about our response to this. And I think of Matthew chapter 22, Jesus gives this parable about the wedding feast and about how this guy's not clothed in the wedding garment. And at the end of the parable, it's pretty harsh because the wedding feast is always heaven. That's the description of heaven. Then the king said to his attendants, "Bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen." So those words seem pretty stark about the possibility of hell, the reality of hell, and that people get sent there.
Yeah, and it's also, I've given actually a couple different homilies on this particular passage because my question is, well, did he somehow get in there without a garment? Or, I think more interesting, did he soil his garment and didn't keep it clean, which is also like that biblical notion of purification, keeping the garment clean. That's why like baptism, especially for us as Catholics, baptism is not like this universal, I'm baptized, now I'm saved, and I'm immediately going to heaven, it doesn't matter what I do. Like is that relationship with God entails an ongoing process of conversion, and a relationship with God is a constant yes. And any time in that process, I can say no to relationship with God, and therefore remove myself by my own free will out of relationship with God. I mean, you have Jesus is very clear, not just in that one, but many different passages in Scripture where he places salvation in the hands of uncertainty. And like Jesus doesn't come to give us certainty, say God accepts everyone, because also part of God's love is his justice, is that God comes in to free us from sin, but we have to be willing to participate with that. And if we're not willing to participate with that, that's a problem. And so like God says, because that's where you have even the Our Father, which is the most common prayer, verbal prayer that we have, which is that forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Going to the parable of the steward who is forgiven the great debt, and then he goes out and finds someone who owes a lesser debt to him, and he starts to hold on and choke him. Then all the other different the servants go before the king, God, and say, he was forgiven by you, your great debt of $1 million. And then this guy had a smaller debt, he didn't forgive him, and the king drags his butt back in front. And you have almost the exact same thing, is that you had no mercy upon him, whereas I had mercy upon you. This guy, all of his debt is back on him. Throw him to the jailers where he will be tormented until he pays it back. And
Wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Wailing and gnashing, you can't.
Yeah.
So like this notion is like, it also goes to that biblical notion of the measure. Jesus says, the measure you measure out will be measured out to you. If you measure out mercy, forgiveness, and love to others, it will be measured out to you. On the other hand, if you don't, like it's also the parable of the 5 talents. There was one who was given 5, one who was given 2 talents, and one who was given 1. All of them are required to double their talents. But then there's the one who had 1. So the guy who comes in with 5, he says, here's my 5, and here's another 5. Here's my 2. Second guy, here's my 2, here's another 2. The third guy, he's like, well, you only gave me 1 talent. So I knew you were a harsh and demanding master. And then
I buried it and hid it.
I buried it, and here's back your talent. And he's like, well, by your own words, I condemn you. By your own words, you say I'm a demanding master. So therefore, I will demand it. You should have given it that. And then same action is tossed out with the
Wailing of gnashing of teeth.
So we're not saying that it's theoretical that people go to hell or some people can go to hell. We're saying that, this is a reality.
The likelihood of people in hell is very high, scripturally speaking.
So does the Vatican have the list then? I think a lot of people want to know of who's in hell. Should we
Yes. But it's a secret list found in the secret Vatican archives.
Okay.
No.
If they have a list of who's going, I'd like to see that.
The church, thankfully, and I think in humility, the church recognizes that Christ, the King, Jesus, the judge, the final judge who will judge all of humanity, sits at the right hand of the Father. Jesus is the judge, and that we cannot judge anyone. Even the church doesn't even actually say that Judas, and biblically speaking, probably the figure of Judas is one of the most kind of scary things if you read it on the subject, because Jesus himself says about Judas, it would be better if this man had never been born. So Judas's fate, as well as that we know that Judas took his life at the very end, hung himself upon his tree, and that very graphic scene is described in the Gospel of John and the other Gospels. So Judas is even the figure of Judas, who also Dante in his Inferno in the Divine Comedy, he placed Judas as a betrayer of a friend at the darkest and the pits of hell, almost right next to Satan himself.
Which is interesting that hell, by the way, is not hot, it's freezing.
According to Dante.
Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting insight that the devil's kind of frozen and his wings are beating and just making it more cold.
You're stuck, and
there's stuck.
There's nothing movement, there's no growth. That's also what Dante is getting onto, is this notion of unchanging, unforgiving, unrepentant, and not sorry.
And also outside of the burning love of God, if God's an all-consuming fire, the further away you get from Him, the more you freeze, not the more you burn.
Yeah, and the more, because Dante, once you ascend from hell up, you go, it's more and more dynamic, and there's more light, there's more fire, so to speak, as you get into heaven itself, which is interesting. I think different than an image than the popular one that we have.
So, but if you go to that, obviously Dante put lots of people in hell.
Yeah, he did. Anyone who ever crossed Dante was in hell.
Which is actually. He also put I find it funny because if you look at the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo, who was actually not the biggest fan of Dante, you'll find in the upper right scene of the Last Judgment, you'll find all the patriarchs and the figures of the Old Testament. And Dante, who is very adamant that Cain was burning in hell, was in hell, Michelangelo is kind of a snub to Dante, placed Cain and Abel actually embracing and kissing each other up in heaven in this reconciliation moment. And then he has Dante's face overlooking the two of them frowning. Michelangelo had a keen wit in terms of how he depicted heaven and hell in the Last Judgment. But the church as a whole doesn't ever say dogmatically, doctrinally, and actually doesn't say anyone is, and doesn't put out a list of anyone in hell, because the church also recognizes we are not the judge. We can't say definitively whether or not who's there, who's not there. But what the church says, using the scriptures as well as the tradition, the writings of the fathers, and consistently throughout the ages, is no, Jesus talked very definitively about the reality of hell, and that there was going to be a judgment. I mean, if you look at John's apocalypse, 1/3 of the world is destroyed, which goes to that notion of 1/3 of the angels. The only persons that the church dogmatically declares to be in hell is the damned angels, fallen angels, and leaves the fate of man in the hands, not of the church, but leaves the fate of man in the hands of the judge, which is Christ.
Praise God for that. I think about this too, and Jesus' words, I mean, as far as how sort of easy we make it, to get out of hell, that just in our own, speaking about it, that basically no one ever goes there. Jesus says some words that are pretty scary, when he says that wide is the way and easy is the path, that leads to perdition, to hell, and narrow is the way and difficult the path that leads to heaven. I think that's one of those sort of challenges to us to be have I been kind of forgetting about this? Not that we need to necessarily live in fear, but I think it's good to go to Jesus' own words about this rather than just sort of project what we want Jesus to think about it or what we want God to feel about it. To be he just wants everyone and anyone can get to heaven or can escape hell.
Right. Well, I mean, and we do that because, as you were saying in the last segment, we're wanting to be more tolerant. We're wanting to think if God is love. We really do focus in on God being love and God being accepting. And so, if we are in that, if we are in that kind of avenue, then what we want to do is we want to make hell less. And so, because a good and loving God wouldn't send people to a place like that. But, and I think one thing that's happened in our society is, and it's a very good thing, one side of love is acceptance. It is that we are loved by God, not because of what we do or what we don't do, but because of His love for us, and just because He is love. And so there is this acceptance that happens in our society, and it's a very good thing. We see it happening all over the place, that we accept people for who they are and where they are. But the other side of love is that there needs to be change, that you're not left where you are, but that there's change that must happen. And without that change, where do we go from
and I
here?
think that, and this is where maybe where this doesn't sit well with people today, is the notion that God does discriminate. And I use that word actually kind of, and I mean it to be controversial, because God does discriminate between the sin and the sinner. And so Jesus once came into the world to cast out demons, to cast out evil, to separate and to extract from human beings evil and sin. And this is very different than, especially from our Catholic understanding from like Luther, which is that Christ comes in to kind of cover up and protect us with grace.
Right.
Like it's where Luther talks about grace, the actions of Christ cover us like a snow-covered dunghill.
Right.
Versus the Catholic understanding, no, Jesus comes in to extract the demonic, to extract evil from us. And therefore he discriminates between human beings and their sin, to pull it out and to therefore heal them and restore them and to bring them new life. But in order for him to do that, Jesus calls out sin. And that's where that notion is of like, we live in a world today where to even talk about sin sometimes is something which is like, well, you're judging people. No, Jesus calls and discriminates. He says, this is sinful actions. This is sinful behaviors. The Holy Spirit, who he breathes into the apostles, like helps us to discern what is evil.
First on our own selves.
First,
too.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is first, we push the sword inward. That's what,
John talks about it, in his first letter, that you know what's evil and what's good by the fruit. I mean, you can tell by the fruit what's good and evil. Yeah.
That image that you use as far as the Lord drawing out that evil from us reminds us of the great scene in the Two Towers, in the books and in the film, where Gandalf, who is the Christ figure, he's now Gandalf the White, who's been resurrected, he's gone through hell, that Theoden, the king, is infested, possessed, if you will, by Saruman, and he draws him out. He says, I will draw you out, Saruman, as you draw out, poison from a wound. And that's it's an interesting scene. I think it's see that Jesus does that for us as well. But it brings up to me the challenge of hell is that the Lord actually takes our freedom seriously.
yes.
That to me is maybe one of the amazing dogmas of the church is our freedom actually matters to God. Your decisions actually matter to God, and that He takes it that seriously, I think is very, very challenging. And also too that God wants us in heaven. God desires the salvation of everyone, but He won't do it against our will.
Right.
Correct.
We can't be pulled kicking and screaming into heaven, that we would make heaven into hell. And I think that's something, C.S. Lewis does a great job of describing that in The Great Divorce, actually in The Last Battle as well, is like people could be in a heavenly place, but if they brought hell in with them, in a sense it doesn't matter.
And even going to like the ancient understanding, the more ancient understanding of hell, which like the modern understanding of it is oftentimes depicted as like this place of fire and brimstone and things like that. But like the ancient, like when you look at like the biblical understanding of the difference between Gehenna, which more closely actually aligns with an understanding of purgatory, a place of fire and of purgation and of pain, and therefore, but also it's not a place of physical pain, but a place of mental and spiritual pain, because you don't have a body. But like then you go to the description of Sheol, or of Tartarus, which is, again, those words are not actually, even in the Jewish understanding, those words are not completely synonymous. Sheol is a place of darkness.
The abode of the dead.
The abode of the dead, the place of darkness, the place of gnashing and the wailing. It's a place of forgetfulness. That's one of the reasons why when the good thief upon the cross says, Lord, remember me.
Yeah.
Part of what he's actually, don't let me be lost to Sheol, because if you were forgotten and this eternal banishment and this forgetfulness and this place of darkness, which I liked about that in C.S. Lewis's Last Battle, like where he had in one of the judgment scene at the very end, he had like the dwarves who didn't want to believe in Aslan and things like that. And so like they're plugging their ears and they're closing their eyes, and then they're wondering why they can't talk to each other, because they are imposing their ignorance and a willful ignorance where they will not see, they will not look, and they will not admit to where they themselves have been wrong. Right. And so like this notion of like this forgetfulness and darkness, and so like in the notion of like what is actually a understanding of hell is like this place where we refuse the mercy of God.
Absolutely.
Where we choose ignorance, we choose our darkness, we choose eternal banishment as opposed to looking and seeing what we've done. And that God, I mean, that's this terrifying thing for me of reflecting upon like what hell, I mean, the reality of hell is like that God, like all actions, all deeds will come to light, but the persons who will turn away from the light and will choose their deceptions and self-deceptions and darkness, because that is preferable to the burning light of God's love.
Well, you hear it even here. I mean, you hear people say, if that's God, then I don't want that God. I don't love that kind of God. I can't love that kind of God that would do this. I mean, you hear it all the time. And I mean, I truly do believe that most, if not all, people in hell will be there from their own choosing. They would never want to choose that kind of a God, even though they're in the torture that they're in.
Well, and this is also the other piece is like the notion of like, this is why like going to that notion of that Christ who doesn't discriminate based upon race or upon gender or upon all the things that we in our humanness we oftentimes discriminate. Jesus discriminates between evil in the presence of the evil one and us, and that's why he does not allow us to self-identify with our sin. He will not allow us to say, this is who I am.
Right.
Does not allow us to self-identify. He says, no, I know your name.
Right.
I was the one who created you. I know who you are. I know what you are, and I know what I created you for, which is greatness, which is my love, which is I did not leave you to be stuck in your sin. But that's where like the danger of self-identification with sin, and there's a difference between like I struggle with sin versus I am my sin.
Oh, well, that's why at baptism he named us.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why he has that claim on us that we are son, we are daughter, and when he knows our name. I mean, that's the whole reason why he talks about a stupid thing like the number of hairs on your head. I mean, what a stupid thing to know, but to him it's that important because he knows us that well. He has that kind of a claim on our life that he would know even the smallest little thing about us, like the hairs on our head. But he's named us your son, your daughter, not your sin.
I think, too, this brings up to us also the mission of the church. That the mission of the church, because there's this great scene, the harrowing of hell, where Jesus on Holy Saturday after his death, he goes down, and Orthodox iconography of it in the Orthodox Church of Jesus smashing down these gates, smashing the devil underneath the door, grabbing Adam and Eve, those who have died, and pulling them back to life, pulling them into, in a sense, that's such a great image of what the church is supposed to be, that we're supposed to be that gate-smashing reality. We're supposed to be snatching people out of the tyranny of the devil, the grip of sin and death. That really is hell. Whether it's isolation or with other people or however you want to describe it, whether it's cold or hot, it's a reality, it's an option, it's a possibility. The devil wants everyone to go there because he wants them all to be miserable, but our job then becomes to continue that mission of Jesus, to help people through faith in Jesus, through membership in the church, through the sacraments, to enter into life.
Right, but it goes right back to what you were talking about freedom and God's love. I mean, you can't have love without freedom. And God knows that. And so that's the reason why when he wants to capture that from us, he wants to help us and to bring us along, but he's not willing to do it without our approval. And so, I mean, when we have the church to lead us and guide us down this road of love and mercy and of understanding exactly who God is, then we're on the right path at that point.
And going into the freedom, like then that is the paradox. I mean, and that what I'm like the true paradox of love is like in that question of like why would God allow people if God was so loving and things like that. But like it's an act of God's love that respects your freedom enough.
Absolutely.
That what you choose, I will allow for you because I love you.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to enter into your suffering with you. But still, like if I force a person to love me, and that's like Doug, you're married. If you had like manipulated, tricked, deceived, pressured your wife into marrying you, like that's not love.
Well, we call it invalid, actually.
Yeah, it's an invalid marriage, absolutely. But the whole point is and therefore the rejection of God is a very real possibility. The rejection of love is a real possibility as a consequence of, otherwise free will is an illusion and love itself is an illusion.
Yeah, that's the way I put it to my students is if you found out your best friend was being paid by someone else to be your friend, would you still think they loved you? Yeah. And the answer is, well, no, they don't. But they've been doing all these good things to you, but they can't love me because someone's making them, someone's paying them. And so we want freedom. We want God's love, but we don't necessarily want it with the freedom that comes with it. We don't want the responsibility of that.
And it always comes back to a relationship as well. So getting away from that list of how many good things I did or how many bad things I did, that I have a relationship with the living God. And it's only through that I'm saved. You know, St. Peter says this in Acts of the Apostles. He says it's only in the name of Jesus, you know, are we saved. And so that becomes part of it as well. The question that comes up then for people, and maybe there's what about the people that don't know Jesus? Is it possible for them to be saved? And I think that's a worthy thing. We can maybe take a minute or two discussing that. There's many more conversations that can happen for those that maybe have never heard about Jesus or just only had bad examples of Christianity or Catholicism and rejected that. Then what about for those people? Is there any chance for them to be saved?
I mean, I think we have to say maybe two answers, but there is a chance, but we're not sure. Mm-hmm. We're not sure how. We're not sure what the mechanisms are for that, how it works. We're not sure how good you have to be, how bad you have to be. I mean, I think one thing that we would say is that it would be the consistency in which you live with the truth that you have. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what we all have to deal with to a certain extent is what have you done with what you know? That's why Paul puts it in the book of Romans. He tells the Jews, he says, you knew the law, and so you're definitely more culpable. But the Gentiles who didn't have the law, they're not going to receive the same reward, but they're also less culpable as well because they only acted in accord with what they knew.
And that's what Jesus, in one of his parables, he also says, the parable of the varying different stewards. There's the one steward, in Jesus' parable, he gives a steward of the owner of the house leaves his house in the keeping of his servants. And he leaves one who beats the other servants, and that one is thrown out into where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. Mm-hmm. The other ones who strike and who are drunk and misuse the giftedness of their positions, like they are severely beaten. And then those who also misused, but they didn't know what they were doing, they receive only a light beating.
A light beating,
right.
That's right.
It's
a great line.
But it's in that notion of justice, is like God takes into account what in law is called mens rea, your knowledge. And this is what Thomas Aquinas talks about. He's like those who are culpably ignorant versus those who are inculpably ignorant. Those who are responsible for their ignorance versus those who knew not. Like that's why like North American Indians, like people in Asia, people in Africa, like people even in Europe today, people who don't know who Jesus is and don't know Christ, like the possibility lies is that they don't know, and God takes into account their knowledge. Mm-hmm. And like this, that's very Thomistic, is the notion is that God, the ordinary way that God saves people, which is through baptism.
Right.
But God, we believe in an extraordinary God. Mm-hmm. So that God gives us ordinary ways for us to be saved. He can act as he chooses in extraordinary ways, in the extraordinary manners in which he works. This is all found in the beauty of our Catholic faith, is that he can extraordinarily work through desire, that a person who did not know, but had they known, they would have had the desire, as well as that a person who sacrifices themselves, even to the point of shedding their blood, that those are two extraordinary ways in which God can reach out his hands and save those who did not know better.
Yeah.
And so that's the possibility. That's why Pope Francis, when he told that young boy, like your father, like he didn't say your father's in heaven.
He said God's not going to abandon your father.
Yeah, but he's but there's that notion where he also opens the dialogue with that small boy, as well as he's made a couple different statements about like even the atheists, like we don't know, and that's why we leave judgment in the hands of God. That's why like Jesus, John 3:16, God didn't come into the world to condemn it, he came in to save it. God sent his son because of his love for us. And so like this notion that God gives us an ordinary way to be saved, but we believe in an extraordinary God. And that's why but the ordinary gives us security and gives us a sense where we don't have to live in fear.
Yes.
That's why I'm just going to go with the ordinary. No, don't like he wants us to live without fear, and that's what baptism and that's what our faith provides.
And that should motivate us too, not out of a place of fear, but out of a place of joy. If we have received the faith, if you're a believer, people that are watching this today, if you're part of the church, then this thought of like, well, God will probably save everybody, so I don't need to tell people about this. Be like, this is so amazing, this relationship that I have with God here and now, that who am I to not share this with other people? And that since we don't know whether, the mechanisms or means by which it's possible still through Jesus that somebody who hasn't heard of Jesus can be saved, that I want them to know about Jesus. Right. I want them to know the good news and hear the gospel. I remember when I was in China years ago we were doing a secret mission trip in China. Don't put this out there. And this young woman who had met the Lord, she grew up in a communist family, and she had met the Lord, had a conversion, and her response was, we asked her about, well, with your parents, she's like, when I found out about Jesus, I couldn't wait to tell them.
Yeah.
And like that should possess our hearts. That should move us. Where like my heart would break if somebody doesn't know the salvation and the joy and the grace that is ours in Jesus Christ. So more than fear of hell, love and gratitude should be motivating us towards sharing this message.
Well,
with
if we
others.
can share who our favorite sports team is and the glories of that, or how great the last restaurant we went to, or where we went on vacation. I mean, you hear people, see people taking pictures of it and coming back and tell everybody about it, put it on Facebook, and that we wouldn't do the same with our own salvation, with our own souls, with what we've received from Jesus, the love we received from God. It's just, it's almost, we've become too comfortable.
Okay, so I think we've come to a couple conclusions today. So the bad place is real.
Yes.
The bad place is real. You can go there, and wide is the way that leads there. It's you can easy as that.
It's easier to go.
That the Lord talks about that. It's part of our faith, and just recognizing that, and that the Lord's desires for us to be saved, and that we get to be part of that saving mission towards reaching out towards others as well. So. Talking about the bad place, hopefully a little bit of hope there at the end as well. Thanks, guys, for engaging in this conversation. Thank you guys so much for watching today on Catholic in America. Thanks for all your support on Patreon, all those who are liking and sharing and subscribing these videos with others. Make sure you tell your friends, and we'll see you next time here on Catholic in America.